What up, everybody? What's happening? What's happening? It is Tech Tip Tuesday today, and I prepared a little presentation here. I hope you guys enjoy the insight. But yeah, you like that little intro music there? That's just to kind of round everybody up and let everybody know that we're about to get started. My comments are acting a little funny, but what up, After Dark Genetics? Got like 14 screens displaying all these things here. So let me just, all right, put this over here. I got like windows on windows on windows on windows. So dabbing and eating. What you dabbing? Always good to hear what people are dabbing and what part of the country they're dabbing, and seeing the different flavors that we got. So today we are going to be talking about, obviously, what's scrolling through the bottom portion of the screen there. Workflow and accountability in cannabis labs. There it goes. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up and kind of almost put a different spin onto the content that we're going to put for Tech Tip Tuesday on 2025. Mainly because, so let me give you the overview. Last year, 2024, Extractor Depot literally went to over 50 different labs across the country. So, I mean, they're not that, it would have been cool if there was one on each state, right? We could have went to every state, but we literally went to multiple labs, every legal state, just about. Everybody that's just coming onto medical and recreational. We're actually in the process of visiting all those people as well. But we noticed a lot of bottlenecks that didn't really stem from essentially the equipment themselves. Obviously, the equipment is something everybody knows, and everybody's like wanting the latest and greatest. Everybody knows there's upgrades that you always need to make. The tech is always changing with the industry. But essentially what doesn't ever change is workflow and accountability. And we've seen that like essentially missing from majority of a lot of the labs that we visited. And that's coming from a management background. I've managed before cannabis. I mean, I've been doing cannabis since 2009. Before that, I was doing lots of management in restaurants and coffee shops. Sounds a little funny, but no, I've managed at least, I would say 2 or 3 teams with about 40 people on each team. And I learned a lot from that. I can't say every single try was successful, but I learned a lot about managing people, and that people actually contribute to your efficiency. Every move you make in the lab is just like a kitchen, where every single move costs a certain amount of money, sadly to say. Every single, person in there is sort of is a cost. Every thing you use is a cost. Everything in that lab is a cost. And so when you don't account for all these things, they start to stack up and sometimes become huge problems that you don't even know where to tackle or how to tackle in the first place, right? So we're not going to go over everything that encompasses sort of lab management and workflow. And things like that, accountability. So we're just going to kind of graze over the top of it first. These are things that need so you need to learn a lesson, and then you need to practice it, and you need to be doing that multiple times a month to really develop a management skill. So we are, or especially Extractor Pros is going to make a point to be the resource to help you guys out with that, because yeah. So we're moving on here. Here is the common pain points that we all noticed in every lab that we went to. There was honestly, there wasn't one lab out there that didn't have these pain points as something that they wanted to address. So let me elaborate a little bit on what I mean by these things, and then we'll kind of go into these things a little deeper. If you guys have questions, please throw them in the comments, because I'm going to do a little Q&A session at the end. I think that's a little different from what we're normally used to. I'm normally just answering questions as I get them, but sometimes that might distract from the actual topic there. So so yeah, we're gonna kind of keep to my format as best I can. I am extremely ADHD, and so we're gonna try to control that as best I know how. Right. Workflow design. Let's talk about that real quick. Number one, common pain points is workflow design. What do I mean by workflow design? What is the difference between a workflow versus an SOP? Because I think people get that mixed up quite often. Now, and I'll talk about that in a second on the next slide. But the next thing is really, after people have established a workflow, it's KPIs or key performance indicators or any other sort of accountability metrics. So what I mean by this is, like, how do you know your runs went well that day? How do you answer that question specifically? Like if let's do a little acting real quick. If you were an investor, you would have a lab manager. Hopefully you're not the lab manager if you're the investor, but hopefully you have a lab manager, and this lab manager, all he really needs to tell you when the investor goes, how well did I do? He should just list off a few numbers, and that should tell the whole story essentially of how well the lab is doing, how efficient the lab is doing. So that's what KPIs and accountability metrics are. And we're going to dive into what those look like specifically. So, and then the last part is the Q&A. So make sure you guys stack up your questions there. I'll make sure to go through them at the end here. Okay, so let's talk about workflow design. Workflow design, I don't see anybody doing this, sadly. I can't say one person that I know at the beginning of their shift lays out a workflow for the day to their shift, essentially. How I can relate that, if you've worked in a restaurant before, when you first clock in, normally a good restaurant team or a tight knit team is going to have some sort of powwow kind of thing in the beginning of the day. You guys are going to talk about what we're trying to accomplish, who's in what station, where everybody's at. Basically, where are all the players on the playing field of this game called Cannabis Lab, right? So essentially a workflow, you would take all your SOPs, all your standard operating procedures, and arrange them in a certain way that's most efficient, or the most efficient way that you are capable of arranging them. That's what a workflow is. And workflow design is obviously when you're designing when you're mapping that out. So like, if you don't have this mapped out prior to you could even do this prior to the work week, and do it on a Monday and just do it for the rest of the week. That would be super responsible. But sometimes, it's hard to plan that far ahead in a lot of these cannabis extraction labs, because things change in like 2 days. Like you'll get a contract out of nowhere, right? So you got to stay pretty flexible and not tie up all your equipment essentially with a poor workflow. And basically, let's talk about a little bit about the steps on why a workflow is so important, right? So predictability and consistency. So like if you do not iron out your workflow or design a workflow for your everyday deals and your everyday projects or SKUs that you need to create, your everyday tasks, they're hard to be predictable. They're hard to be consistent. You don't know how well you're doing, and that would be the next slide. But if you can predict things, you can also be more efficient at spending. You can be more efficient about planning. And basically, it really goes back to maintenance on a lot of things. Like once you have a workflow design ironed out, when you got to fix your corking, You, without even being there to hear the cork in or any, as long as it's not immediately broken, somebody didn't do something stupid, you would already know what state that corking is in. You would already know how much butane you had left at the end of the day and how much you need to buy essentially for the next week. So all of those things really go into costs and save you a lot of money just by being predictable and consistent. Number two is bottlenecks are identified from the start on a nice, efficient workflow design. You know, a lot of us don't have like the best equipment, right? So what happens is, you know, we put together the workflow that we can do our best at. Like sometimes a lot of the situations at labs is just the technician just gets served up a crazy situation where he needs to do a crazy output number, but doesn't really have the proper equipment to do that. And so a lot of people that don't build a workflow for that, you're just blind, right? You don't know you don't have filter paper till the end of the run or something like that, right? And it really ruins things a lot. So also identifying your bottlenecks from the start kind of like validates any issues from being operator errors, right? Or technical issues or something like that. Sometimes, let's say, sometimes people have a cork in T91. I'm just always going back to recovery because that's usually the biggest bottleneck for a lot of people. Let's just say you got a T91, right? And you got a 4 kilowatt heater on it. If I ironed out my workflow design before running that system, I would already know that there's not enough heat to feed that cork in, and that's going to be the whole bottleneck that I will eventually address. If I didn't identify that from the beginning, right, I wouldn't know if it was my heater that was lacking, or I would like immediately everybody just goes to the pump and goes, oh, we just got to switch out the pump. We need a bigger pump. We need a bigger pump. And then you realize you get a bigger pump and it doesn't go any faster. You know, so then people start, you know, trying to pick apart everything they don't really understand to find the bottleneck. So it's always good to understand where your limitations are and where your bottlenecks are from the start. And that would be from designing a proper workflow at the beginning of the day or beginning of the week, right? This one is huge because I literally, man, if I had a nickel for every service call that blamed equipment, not necessarily our equipment, just equipment they bought, and they're blaming the equipment because it's not doing what, you know, they bought it to do or whatever, right? Usually if I have a workflow design in place, I will immediately decipher if it was the operator that fucked up. Is it the SOP that maybe is inefficient and maybe we need to revisit the SOP, or is it a manufacturing, an equipment thing that I probably need to get a warranty involved, or I need to get some sort of service, customer service involved? Normally, when I see people running into an issue like this, they're just throwing everything at the wall. They're blaming the operator. They're putting some pressure on him. They're getting everything maintenance that seems sort of a suspect. And then they're immediately calling the manufacturers and just yelling at them. So all of this trouble would immediately get solved or bypassed altogether if we had a workflow design, right? And the last thing I'm going to suggest is quarterly updates. And I'm even going to say I kind of fucked up, and it should be bi-weekly updates to workflow design, because everything changes in this industry so quickly. Tech, equipment, operators. Like, I don't know how many times we've had issues where clients had a problem because one operator left that obviously received the training, but was never really instructed to train others or given the tools to train others, right? Basically when that employee left, so did all the tech. And another guy gets hired and expected to do that, whatever the last guy did. And he has no clue, right? He has no, and he's just listening to like, hey, well, we found this SOP, follow that. And that's what he did, and then it becomes just a whole thing where it trickles down from, if the top guy's not trained, all the other guys aren't trained, and you're just a liability waiting to happen, straight up, because we have dangerous equipment we're dealing with, right? So that's all about work design. I know there's a bunch of comments here. Let me scroll back and see some of the comments there. SOP, yes, stands for standard operating procedure. I know it's a standard running procedure, same thing. Few people do that, but a lot of people's SOPs are out of whack. Oh, yes. Fresher the material, the better. The older material, get ready for. Yeah, you're right there. It's funny you say this. I'm going to actually pin this comment because it's actually true. So. Okay, I might have messed with my presentation here, but SOPs are not standard. And if the SOPs aren't tried and true in the beginning, meaning like you really have, like, it takes a special person to be able to break down an SOP and then, essentially shoot holes through it. That's kind of the approach that I have to come off when I do like consultations on people's SOPs. I'm trying not to hurt anybody's feelings a lot of the times, but you got to comb through that stuff. And it's funny, like this might be a little bit of a tangent, but when I was in elementary school, I had a real hard time in English class, and we had this thing where we had to write SOPs. They didn't call it SOPs; they called it recipes. So we had to write recipes, and didn't necessarily have to be a food. And we'd have to write it, and the teacher would take everything literally and perform that thing, that recipe in class. So I kind of think of it the same way, right? Like if you just say put peanut butter on the bread, you really didn't specify which side of the bread I should have been putting that peanut butter on. And so you're leaving it up to like subjectivity to translate that. And so, you get a lot of people who be putting peanut butter on the edges of the bread, put peanut butter on the outside of the bread. Same thing. People are going to be injecting with 40 PSI nitrogen, 50, 60, 70. They don't even know why they're going up or down on nitrogen pressure, because it's not really laid out to them why, right? So really comb through your SOPs and, shoot bullets through them. Because if you cannot answer a question why, or follow it literally and get the same result or get the intended result, then it's an SOP that definitely needs some care and revision. So let's move on to the next topic, guys. That was a good hefty one there. Let's go on to key performance indicators. All right, I'm going to be straight up, and I'm going to be honest and say currently key performance indicators are going to be every lab manager who is not profitable worst enemy. So let's talk a little bit about what key performance indicators are mainly, okay? So key performance indicators are a solid number value that indicate progress toward a specific output goal. And this output goal would be aligned with your workflow design, right? So you need a workflow design in order to design KPIs. But why do you care about KPIs as a lab manager? Literally, because when somebody asks you, how did today go? You're not supposed to give a big winded explanation. Oh, this run, we used this pressure, and I don't know exactly what happened, but this came out this way and this went this way, so we had to read. You're not supposed to say any of that. it's not scalable, basically. If you get in a meeting with a bunch of other lab managers or executives from the company, even, because I know a lot of lab managers do sit on executive boards and in the companies they work for, and sometimes maybe not executive boards, but you probably have some sort of voice to the higher ups, right? Quote unquote. So they really don't give a fucking shit what pressure your material columns were. They don't give a shit what your CRC media was, because they don't understand any of that. And that's not for them really to understand. They hired you to understand those things. So this is where you find specific things in your lab, and we'll get to some examples in a second. But that you can say, when they go, how well is it doing? You go 6. That should just tell a story, essentially, right? That's the optimal situation, right? Obviously, you're not gonna. It's a lot more than that. Most of the time, they're gonna ask you why a 6. But if your KPIs are clearly mapped out and they are derived from your workflow design, all of those questions get answered within a solid number, which is. It sounds ridiculous, but honestly, guys, it's crazy how powerful this is with especially people that are very mindful about spending and finances. Okay, these solid number values should align with your workflow design. Yep, I kind of went ahead of myself there. So don't be pulling KPIs out of your ass, or don't be trying to think super creatively on where you should be getting these numbers, because you should just be referring to your workflow design. So like, let's see what else. I got some examples, so I'm not trying to get too ahead of myself. This is my favorite part of KPIs. So even though they almost are a scary thing, but if you are an overachiever, which honestly, I see a lot of overachievers in this industry, people that are just willing to go the extra mile. Just sometimes they don't have the tools to do so, or they need to prove themselves to do so. So these KPI, these solid numbers, eliminate the need for you to have to go and meet with your executive to tell them how well you're doing, or your higher up, or anybody who's above you. Even if you're not the lab manager and you're just the worker in the lab, and you want your lab manager to know how well you're doing, right? For a fact that you're doing fucking awesome, but just you knowing that ain't enough, right? So we need to empower, how do we show the rest of the company that what you're doing is just slaying? And so when problems arise, or the company not doing well, or something like that along the lines, you can be like, hey guys, well, my KPIs are just slaughtering. What about yours? And what changes will we need to achieve these things? Because KPIs are going to tell you immediately right off the bat what needs to get changed. So let's talk examples, because it's probably what anybody who's been listening to me this whole time is probably wondering, what the fuck numbers do we have? The easiest one that it's a little generic for me, but everybody understands: yield percentage. If your yield percentages are pretty high, then chances are you're doing a pretty solid work. As long as your color is looking pretty good, right? I recommend, though, if yield percentage is going to be a KPI, that needs to have some sort of average, so that if you're above average or below average, vice versa, things like that. So another one that I see is costing people more money than anything else is turnover time duration. So a lot of people are kind of unclear on what exactly turnover or changeover time means. And changeover time, turnover time. Turnover time is more restaurants. I'm sorry, guys. For tables, but in a lab we call it changeover time. So changeover time is basically the time it takes for you to change one cycle of the closed loop, basically pull all the material columns out, swap them, clean it, and vac it down and get it ready for the next run. Everybody's always timing their runs, recovery speeds, blah, 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 blah. But what about your changeover time? Because I see a lot of people taking their sweet fucking time during those times. And other people that are rushing those parts are doing super sloppy work and basically fucking with the next example I have, cost per run. So cost per run, mainly that's going to be the solvent that you're using per run. That's where most of the cost is. Of course, the material has its own cost, and that's where I recommend everybody try to get to a vertically integrated structure, because that's where material cost is a little bit more, not such of a dramatic variable. But overtime used is another one here. I know, and this is more for labs that actually pay their employees overtime. Overtime used in my kitchens and whatnot was unacceptable. Overtime usually meant somebody didn't do what they were supposed to do, because my workflow design in a lot of my restaurants were carefully tied to schedules, and there was a budget that was aligned to those schedules. So a lot of things, if the schedule got fucked up, it really messed with everything else. So overtime really messed with my bonus at the end of the year as a manager, right? So I would not, I mean, you don't necessarily have to penalize people for overtime use, but the higher that number is, the more of a red flag it is as to why we're using overtime. Or do we have an inefficient SOP? Obviously, the workflow is being affected somewhere. Utilizing your workflow design, you should be able to determine that over time where that comes from. And number of maintenance visits is another one. I see a lot of people rebuilding a lot of equipment. Obviously, isolators have a moving part right now. There's a stir that never used to be a part of the system. We had very little moving parts in the past. So it's something that needs to be maintained and a part of your workflow design and in your key performance indicators, right? So that was that, guys. That was a lot of just shit to just throw at you in a chunk there. But it's just new things that I want you guys to really think about, because this is really affecting how profitable every single one of your labs can be. And we see, I'm sure you guys have experienced a lot of labs closing down lately, a lot of labs opening up, a lot of different markets opening and closing, right? So we want to stay fluid. We want to stay efficient. We want to stay profitable. The cannabis lab is literally become a business. You can't just know tech now, or know how to work equipment, or know how to sell stuff to be a lab anymore. You need to have it all, and you need to treat it like a full-on business. So, that's a lot of what we have experienced here at Extractor Depot. Between me and Andrew, we have quite a bit of, people management, business experience, and a lot of our managers as well have the same type of experience. I know RJ is, you guys know RJ, he's got quite a bit of that kind of people experience as well. So, just want to get you guys thinking a little differently. If your lab needs to be a little bit more profitable, look at workflow design. And if you guys need help with workflow design, that's essentially my specialty there. So, let me follow up on these questions here. Let's see. Chris Cadillac, what's up? You work with Extractor Depot, shout out. Hell yeah. A lot of extractors out there do not know what they're doing. They put their lives and everyone at risk, not wearing the right clothes. Chris Cadillac's right. We see a lot of dangerous things going on. There's a lot of things in that C1D1 booth, guys, that you guys really need to remember why that booth is there. I'm not saying everybody is ignorant to everything they're doing in the booth, but keep in mind, even sensors, I'm just going to say that, even sensors, they need to be all intrinsically safe displays. And just kind of know what intrinsically safe looks like, and whatnot, right? So, it's all about the flour has to be good, no sprays, it'll show in the oil. Yep, that's definitely true. Gas costs and hourly, yeah, those are huge KPIs. Efficiency is a better metric than yield from Shane Extracts. Yeah, that that is a huge one. Honestly, Shane Extracts has got that right, guys. If let me unpin my comment and pin his comment. There you go. That you guys don't have to scroll through it. So it's not really his opinion. It's correct. Like if you are efficient, then that means you can afford the yield no matter what. And it maybe sometimes it's not no matter what, but sometimes or not, or all the time, you're going to know that line of when it's not, the yield is too low, right? Because it's not efficient. So efficiency is definitely a greater metric, a greater KPI than yield. Yield is just the generic one that I threw out there that people would understand easily, but it is not one I recommend to hold your flame by. Pressure gauge working correctly. Yeah, that would make that a part of your workflow, is to check all the pressure gauges. They tell you a lot, so you definitely want to be paying attention to every single pressure gauge. I know some people say they can run without pressure gauges, but yeah. In average, how much gas do you lose running fresh frozen? Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. So let me address this. I'll pin that up there so everybody can see that. Running fresh. Okay, let's just start with dry. Dry. Let's see. I can't post the question, sadly, onto the feed. So it's just going to be everybody watching this recorded on YouTube is too sorry. But yeah, you're it's about if you're using socks. Okay, if you're not using socks, dry material, you should see about 1 to 3 pounds of solvent left in the column at the end of your run. If you want to be really efficient, you can have like 1 pound of solvent, and 1 pound of solvent is literally in a 6x48 is going to look like nothing, because 1 pound spread out through that material in a 6x48, all you're going to have is fumes. So sometimes you can recover the column down to a vacuum. I don't really recommend that though, just because you're going to be pulling a lot of nasty shit out when you do that. And unless you have a second collection vessel to send that nasty oil a different direction, I'd probably not even waste my time with that. Now let's talk about socks with dry material. Socks with dry material, I would expect 3 to 5. And if I'm consistently getting 5, now when I say 3 to 5, these are KPIs, right? As long as I have a workflow that says to utilize the socks, my KPI can be 3 to 5 pounds of residual solvent per run. But 5 too many times would indicate that I'm on the borderline of being non-efficient. So why would somebody leave the solvent in the column, essentially? Because it comes out of the sock easier. It just all slides out of the sock, especially if there was 5 pounds of solvent in it. So that's why it's super easy to change over, but is a liability. Because you got raw butane, just fumes dealing with all that, right? So now let's say live resin. So live resin is a little bit different because it's cold, and then you normally have a chilled column, which is chilled almost as cold as a solvent tank, or if not colder, right? So in this case, you're going to get the solvent to pass through the column, but then you're trying to push it into a hot collection pot. So majority of the solvent is going to want to stay in the column. So I'm gonna say an acceptable amount for that is going to be about 5 to 8 pounds. I know that was a drawn out answer. It took me a while to get there, but I wanted everyone to know. And we're talking about 6 by 48. So I just saw your comment that says you have a 5 pound column. So I'm assuming that is a 4 by 48. So cut everything I just said in half. So if you're doing live resin, 5 to 8 pounds on a 6 by 48. So on a 4 by 48, I would expect to lose, ballpark of about 3 to 5 pounds. That's what me just not doing math because I got a bunch of screens in front of me. I don't really like to say percentage because I want to know how much solvent went into the system and how much solvent I recovered back. And that's how I'll calculate what's left in the column. Yep. And I don't really say a percentage just because it's just a harder number to deal with. Yeah. If the yield's low, is costing you money to run the sheet. Yeah, exactly. So here's another statement. Basically, I pinned that up there and I'm not the best with the comments right now. Let's see. You don't lose as much with fresh frozen because it's already full of water, so you should be using nearly as much as dry. I think what I just said was different than that. But so 5 pounds per gas per column is what you're losing. Okay, are you guys having a conversation between themselves? It's hard to tell. Okay, but essentially, yeah. On a, let's just say a 5 pound column, a 4 by 48, I would be okay with losing about 3 to 5 pounds of salt, maybe a little more than that. Probably not 3 to 5 because that's dry. So I would say more along the lines of 5 to 8 at the end of the day. Because essentially you can try to dry out that column. You're asking me questions like, okay, cool. You're gonna try to dry that column out as best you can, but especially if you're using socks, that's another variable. So how that works is the gas will actually pull around the sock, and then it's going to go into vacuum, which is going to suck whatever's soaked into the material. And it's going to be pulling it off via a vapor, right? So that sock eventually is just going to get frozen when you pull enough on it. And if it's frozen, the solvent's not moving. It's not going to get sucked into a hot collection vessel. That's just the physics of that. So you can nitrogen dry it as much as you want. You can recover it down to a vacuum if you want. But at the end of the day, on a fresh frozen because a column is cold, it will not let all 100% of the butane out. You can try your best to be as efficient as you can, to get as close to 100% as you can. But essentially, at the end of the day, you're going to be battling efficiency, right? So you're going to spend a lot of time getting that last 3 pounds out of the column when you could have been halfway through another run already. So that's where workflow design comes into play, because anybody can make a workflow, but you need to make a workflow strategically so it doesn't cost you $1 million. So butane is not soluble in waters. Yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of water in I have a lot of water in some runs, especially when the material wasn't frozen properly. So it mixes. If you freeze your solvent tank, though, you'll get a bunch of ice crystals essentially at the bottom. Or if you chill the solvent tank, then the water is much denser and will actually collect at the bottom. You'll actually see it as like little circles at the bottom of your tank. It's pretty trippy. So yeah, and if you chill it colder than that, those will actually turn to ice cubes. So when you actually drain your solvent tank, you'll actually see ice cubes in your tank. That's not a good thing, but it's also clogged a lot of solvent tanks that we've ran into. So Have you put live sift in a column? Yes, I have actually. Live sift. And I guess we're kind of going off the rails here. It is the end of the presentation. So, live sift, yeah. The problem with that is a lot of the times that stuff is sifted via CO2 or liquid nitrogen assistance. So it is extremely cold. And what the problem with that is there's a lot of condensation that happens immediately after the process. So not necessarily just from it like being in a humid room or anything like that. Just as soon as those trichomes break off and drop into something that is warmer than liquid nitrogen, it will immediately suck in the moisture. And so what you would have to do is essentially freeze dry the sift, or you have to essentially vacuum dry it. And there's some freeze drying vacuum techniques. You don't necessarily need a freeze dryer. And you guys can hit me up on consultations for that one if you really want that trick. But yeah, you essentially need to do that, is dry it out after a cryogenic process. I guess CO2 isn't exactly cryogenic, but all those processes will get, and that's why it clogs the system. Is literally because you got a bunch of wet keef, which is just a brick. So, Chris Cadillac's too oily will clog your system. It will clog your system, but not because it's too oily, just because it's just really hard to soak a brick of keef. Wouldn't you be able to run it live sift like fresh frozen if you got the water away from it? Yeah, you can't put frozen keef. If it's frozen, if keef is frozen, like ice cube frozen, that means it's covered in water and they will not extract because the water will block it from being extracted. So I would imagine if you do extract it, you'd have to pressurize the material column quite a bit to increase the solubility, and also to permeate that keef brick. And it would lead to probably recovery issues because you won't be able to dry that keef brick out very well. And I wouldn't even imagine getting a dry keef brick out of a sock. So you would leave a lot of butane in it just so that it stays like a brick. That way, when you get it out of the column, it's a lot easier to deal with. Because I would imagine that would just make a nightmare for your socks, and is trying to keep them clean anyway. Why don't we have to dry fresh frozen? Because there's no condensation on the actual growing process. That's why. You're freezing the material and then extracting it. You're not freezing it, then transporting it unfrozen. You see what I'm saying? Keef is not a freezing process. You cryo extract it, and that's usually in sort of a holding vessel or a bin or parchment paper. Or, it's not necessarily sitting on something liquid nitrogen cold the whole time to keep the condensation from collecting. If live sift is frozen, it's the same as fresh. So if you're talking live sift, you're probably talking about the tumbler. I forget, Rosinator, I think. Shout out to Rosinator. I don't know many other machines that can do it properly other than that one. If you're I'm sure you can do it a backyard way, but I'm not trying to give you tips on that because that's already dangerous. Yeah. So live sift, you totally can, but you're risking moisture. And if you ignore that moisture, you're gonna get a dark color. Because live, a lot of people weren't around for the live resin days when it was actually introduced back in like 2012, 2013. It's got to be a highlighter yellow color. So that's the thing is live. When people show me live resin all the time, like I've done live resin. I've done it open blasting, the shittiest way possible back in those days. Today, it's really tough for a legal lab to process in the same way without fucking up the quality of the material in the process, right? Um, so yeah, it's just a nightmare with that water involved. You don't want any water involved, and if anything, you would rather have ice than water, but you don't want the like with live resin, where when we load the column, the ice isn't formed over the bud. The bud in itself has moisture in it. So the whole thing of itself is frozen, essentially. It's not covered in a layer of ice, which essentially what would happen in condensation. Condensation, a layer would happen there. So yeah, you would have to defrost that layer before actually starting the extraction. And like Quails on Rails is saying quite a bit, there water in itself extracts for one, so it loosens up a lot of things that and makes it just ride the butane extract. But at the same time, just the butane can't do its job if water's in the way or blocking the actual stuff that the butane needs to get to, right? So, no problem. Choose your own path. I love great questions. You had a great question there. And so I definitely don't want to take that away from that conversation. Thank you for contributing there. And I see the original Resonator guys. They are here in the comments section. Yeah, shout out to them. If you guys, are interested in that process, that's one of the processes that definitely I can stand behind as a grower myself. So, reach out to them for more questions on their stuff. But if you do have questions on how to align something like that in a workflow, that's my specialty. So, all right, dry before decarboxylation, liquid after decarboxylation. Those are good. Yeah, those are good. Recommendations there. All right, so now I got to give you guys my sales pitch. This is the end of the stream we've been on. I was shooting for about 45 minutes. We're at 47 now. I really appreciate all you guys supporting Tech Tip Tuesdays. I'm going to use this time to also remind you guys that Tech Tip Tuesdays we're going to come at it a little differently for 2025, right? So, a lot of the more techie, like processing tricks and any sort of the nitty gritty as far as short path, closed loop, isolations, equipment training, all that stuff. I'm going to kind of leave it to our hourly consulting services, because I think I do you guys more good actually talking directly to you. And I'll go out there and say our 1 hour FaceTime consult price is cheaper literally than pretty much anybody with the same experience in our industry is going to give you. So don't be afraid. Hit me up on the DM as well if you have questions on how to go about that. But essentially, you can just call Extractor Depot. The number's right above me here. extractordepot.com. You guys can get all your parts there. We're still working on cleaning the website up, making it a little bit more friendly for you guys to search around for stuff. We're working on that, and we've heard the voice of the people, and they would love something where they can browse a little easier. Check out our locations and Extractor Pro's Instagram. We're definitely going to be beefing up OKC's Instagram a little bit more, because if you guys don't know, they actually have a showroom that is much nicer than our LA showroom at this point. So if you guys want to see like a whole catalog of our equipment from the beginning to the end up in person, and you're in the Midwest area, go ahead and either DM them or just give us a call, and we can connect you with that store. And they literally do everything we do out here in LA, but they do it out in OKC and service pretty much the East Coast and the Midwest. So don't be afraid to reach out to them, and appreciate you guys. Thank you, the original Resonator. I love how accessible and open you are. Hey, yeah, that's the thing, is like nothing's a secret anymore. I'm personally me, I'm in the mode where like if anything is like if you're trying to protect any IP like it's some sort of, you know, God's gift to the industry at this point. Um, it's not a move that you should be proud of because it's not going to get you anywhere in the long run. We need to start focusing all of our businesses on the management side and helping and being a resource for the management side. So oh, I got kicked. So appreciate you guys, and I'll see you on YouTube.